In this video, we're going to talk very briefly about misuses of statistics and specifically misleading graphs. So the way that data is often presented to us is absolutely fine. The way that most statistics that are presented to us by official sources are usually done quite well. But there are occasionally statistics that are put out there for consumption by the public that in some way attempt to make the data look better than it does, or to adjust it in such a way that it can be read slightly differently. And one of the ways that gets done is by having graphs which represent the data but adjusted slightly so they look a bit different. So if we look at these ones here that are on screen, all of these sets of all these graphs are attempting to show the same data, but they're all showing it in a slightly different way that is not quite accurate and representative of the data. So if we look at the first one here on the left, you notice that there's no labels on the vertical axis. So for all we know, the sales of dog food, the difference between Doggo's brand and Munchie's brand, that could literally be 1. In a given year, Doggo's might have sold 1 less than Munchie's according to this graph, because we don't have any label on the axis. But then again, if we see on the next graph over, there is a label on the axis, and it's still showing the massive difference between the Doggo's and the Munchie's sales of dog food. But when you look at the actual axis, you notice that the actual difference in sales is only 120. So because the graph doesn't start down at 0, down the bottom, then the difference between these two looks way different just because of where we started the graph. So that's why this is not quite accurate enough. If we look at this next one over, there's been an attempt made to make a bar graph, except this time they're using a picture of a dog instead of the bars. So in this, aside from the fact that they haven't labeled their axis, which is clearly not acceptable after having seen how it works with the first one, the fact that they've used a picture instead of bars isn't also very accurate either. Because again, we've seen the numbers in this. We know that Doggo's only sold 20 less than Munchie's. But this dog on the right on the graph looks far larger than the dog on the left. Twice, 2.5 times as large maybe. And that's not really representative of the actual difference between the sales of these two dog food brands. We can see here on the right how the data should have actually been presented to us. Graph starts at 0, is labeled all the way down. The axis is labeled as to how the numbers should be read. And then when you see it here, that the difference between the sales of these two brands is very, very small when seen in the overall context of the sales. But it's not just bar charts that these things get done to us on. If you take a look at these two graphs here, so on the left we have a pie chart, and from the pie chart there's two things in particular that are not quite working with this. This here is supposed to represent how the split is for university students on their choice of subject, so between science, business and the humanities. But you notice here that business is marked as 50%, but the section that it's in is clearly smaller than 50% of the whole circle. And this one's less obvious to spot, but when you add up 27.4, 31.6 and 50, you do not get 100%. This is more than 100%. So for whatever reason, somebody has manipulated the data to try and make one of these look better than the other. And then if we look at this one over here, this next graph over, this is an attempt to suggest that numbers are going up quite drastically. But you notice this is only showing a section of the graph. This only shows us from 30 up to 34 on the of this bar. Whereas if this line was shown going all the way back further on, how the bar acts before this point could have been further down. Or you notice that if we ran this all the way down to 0, you would see that between 2002 and 2005, the difference is not actually that big. It only went up by 4,000, as opposed to what it looks like here going up by quite a large amount. So these are just things to be aware of when you're presented with graphs which are representing data.